Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And it looks like 2020 is going to take a little bit of work to get going properly, which means we might have a bit of a short week here. And again, I'm not about to tempt fate by complaining about that. So here we go, folks. This is On the Pulse. Got 6 albums on the docket today. Starting off with an EP, though, from Greg Williams, The Mistakes I've Made.
In the past I can't escape. That's why I'm leaving you on the right side of goodbye.
Starting off 2020 with full disclosure, I know Greg Williams. He and I used to sing country karaoke together, and I've actually had a physical copy of this EP for a while now. But now that it's gone live across streaming platforms this year, let's see what mistakes he's brought to the table. Honestly, not many. And with no room for error on 4 songs, that's promising indeed. The easy comparison is splitting the difference between Dylan Carmichael, Cody Jinks circa I'm Not the Devil, the competently produced album, and maybe the most recent Randy Houser album last year, with his gruff but honeyed vocal delivery opposite the sizzling but warm guitar pickups, the saturated organ lines, some sharp drum work, and Greg Williams' fiddle, which sounds really great whenever it slides through, which is conveniently on the songs where he has writing credits and the most vibrancy, that being Livin to Die and Right Side of Goodbye, which play to the sort of curt stoicism in life and relationships that can also cut loose and really shred. Now that being said, as an EP, I do have quibbles. The bass lines can feel kind of underweight for this style of country music to match with the texture of the guitar smolder. I'd love to hear more fiddle, and it's hard to avoid the feeling that the production was trying to smooth out organic edges that probably could have been left in, especially in the slightly over-mixed backing vocals. Hell, it'd probably do wonders for amplifying the unique raw personality that is here. But you know what, as it is, very promising start. Not too many mistakes to miss a recommendation from me. So yeah, 7 out of 10, absolutely check this out. Next, from Echosmith, Lonely Generation.
A pixelated version of ourselves, empty conversations.
In the pantheon of bands utterly screwed by sloppy promotion and singles choice, Echosmith would certainly have a place in the 2010s. You might remember them for the mostly embarrassing Cool Kids and Bright, but they were a decent little indie pop brothers and sister act in the vein of maybe Mr. Wives, a little bit more muscle and verve on their album cuts. And yet it's been 7 years since that debut album, 6 since the breakthrough single, and after a few scattered EPs, they left Warner to release this project independently. And I gotta give some credit to the band for keeping the homegrown retro 80s indie pop with enough polish to maintain identity and sparkle, with some better than average hooks and enough yearning swell to actually have some character. And that's about it. See, that's the exasperating thing about Echosmith. As much as I really want to praise them for competency and polish, between all the breathy delivery, the undercooked grooves, some bafflingly ugly synth choices, a bit of unfortunate production blending, especially around the percussion, and writing that just does not have enough flair in the rather rote millennial observations and relationship drama, they're just way too middle of the road and milquetoast to stand out all that much. And then discovering that their father handled co-writing and a lot of the production, well, I don't know what to tell you. It's got the feel of an insular family affair. Comfortable, pretty organic even, but not taking any risks or really thinking much outside the box. So yeah, it's decent. 6 out of 10, if you're curious. Next up, from Poppy, I Disagree.
You can be free, you can be free.
I don't know, folks. I think this story deserves a better happy ending than this album. And to be frank, I was worried that this would even come out, given the fallout of Poppy from Titanic Sinclair, once again revealed to be an abusive shit stain, and with Poppy now free on a new label to pursue further fame and success. Our pop metal post-genre cult leader, she was supposed to be leading us into a bright new dawn here, and yet I Disagree doesn't quite stick the landing. Maybe the hype as one of the first major releases of the year set the expectations way too high, but in truth, I disagree, has issues I was highlighting on Am I a Girl that are all the more pronounced when she fully embraced the genre fusion. For one, it feels like a lot of the grooves and adequate bass lines were sacrificed on this altar, which when combined with the whiplash transitions in tone and sound make for a weirdly unstructured and underweight listen. They've got the appearance of heaviness thanks to all the down tuning and the pummeling breakdowns, but when you're matching it with Poppy's rather limited vocal range, no matter how many layers you're gonna pile on, it feels like a lot of punches were really being pulled. Not helped by all the goopy synth mixing that's trying to be more industrial and isn't really getting there. And I include some of the content and themes in similar territory, with this newest reincarnation of Poppy the most openly rebellious of power structures, but it's not like Titanic Sinclair wasn't involved in the writing and the weird defensiveness that can leak into some increasingly blunt songs that gets kind of hard to ignore or justify. And for as much as this album wants to deconstruct cult-like organizations now, you'd think this album would touch on how much Poppy's own iconography played there, get a little more self-aware, and yet it never does. I don't know, again, this is a project that's got a few potent moments when the pop metal fusion really gets going or a groove locks in, but none of it passes up on similar moments on Am I a Girl, where I was predicting Poppy could hit that conceptual limit, and sadly, this point's just pulling in the concrete. 6 out of 10, only decent. Next up, from Georgia, Seeking Thrills.
It's all you've been looking for, and the meaning that you have to go.
So I checked out Georgia's 2015 debut album on a whim last week, because normally this time of year doesn't have much to care about, and I was seeing some mild buzz, and I wasn't all that impressed, to be blunt. Decent enough percussion-driven indie pop that trended towards electronica, that tended to default to some really ugly synth blending and any sort of consistent groove, but apparently the sophomore album 5 years later is better? Well, her choices in goopy, blaring atonal synths remain as frustrating as ever, and that MIA by way of Church's delivery hasn't gone anywhere, for better and for worse, but I can tell there's been a little bit more refinement and spark in the composition and production. More sparkle in the lead melodies, more of a focus on hooks, even if they do tend to default to blunt repetition more than I'd prefer, more developed grooves, and absolutely enough polish to guarantee some club play for the best singles. And yet that's about as deeply as I connect with it, half because the writing and vocal delivery is still pretty underwhelming and kind of basic in the dance floor hookups and breakup stories, nothing you haven't seen before, and made all the more stark when she brings on the guest vocalists who outshine her, but when she also tries to show more originality, her influences, they blare through all the stronger. It's curious, but when you consider how front-loaded this album is, when the MIA influence blares through in the midsection, it's hard to avoid how toothless this affectation kinda is. Overall, I hear the improvement. I absolutely get the audience that'll dig this a lot more than me in tone and delivery, but there weren't that many thrills in this journey. 6 out of 10 though. Check it out if you're curious. Next up, from Vvilderness, Dark Waters. Guess I shouldn't be all that surprised we start off this year with some atmospheric black metal from a relative unknown, this time from a single-person project from Hungary that's more in the blackgaze and post-metal side of things with a splash of acoustic folk tendencies, although he certainly delivered heavier and more melodically defined projects with every passing year. This is his second official project under his name. He's got a little bit more under different names, and while I can hear a lot of the potent pieces within the atmospheric black metal that can really grab me, a good melody, solid balance between watery acoustics and the blackened passages, some guttural delivery, even a solid underlying theme and poetry of having to face the return to the unknown depths and wilderness in the face of humanity's ruin. I'm stuck thinking this isn't quite hitting greatness yet, and it should. And I'm gonna blame the production the most, but the groove and percussion specifically. The kick drums and snares can sound inconsistent and kind of muddy within the song. The main melodic guitar tones is kind of runny and not really as strident as it should be, not counting the weirdly clunky pipe section on Havasok Snowy Mountains, and the bass guitar has nowhere near the body to really punch up that roiling tide. Couple that with some weak transitions, and the feeling the album starts to run short of unique compositional ideas and potent climax points pretty quickly. I don't know, while these depths can certainly set an early vibe, I'm not about to wallow in them all that long. Still decent though, I kinda dug it. 6 out of 10, if you're curious. And finally, from Selena Gomez, Rare.
I needed to lose you to find me.
I've got a weird relationship to Selena Gomez's music. I've been consistently indifferent to outright panning her albums, but she's got an uncanny knack of dropping at least one or two singles that win me over, and they're normally the singles nobody else likes. But hey, she recruited another small army of producers and songwriters of varying competence to try and assemble a third solo album. Her last dropped in 2015, and she rode that out for an impressive amount of time, and you know, with her curation work on the 13 Reasons Why soundtracks, you'd think she'd have slightly better pop instincts than this. And she's not dropping projects under Hollywood Records anymore, so you'd think the production quality would have stepped up beyond this fidgety minimalism that can barely disguise the cheap stiffness in the percussion in a constant string of attempts to try to replicate Hands to Myself by way of Camila Cabello with a bit more half-composed groove and vocal production that isn't anything close to consistent. All the more ironic as Hands to Myself was one of the worst songs on that last album. We don't need more of it. And yet, given how frail Selena Gomez's voice can be, you'd think there'd be a little bit more to flesh out the tones and support behind her instead of something so brittle and jittery that only draws attention to those moments of inconsistency, which makes her seem weirdly overshadowed when Black and Kid Cudi of all people show up with a thicker, more developed vocal tone. But what's most baffling is the lyrical arc of this album, which probably shows the most focus to date in concluding her recovery narrative, being able to both project strength and comfort with being vulnerable going forward. And yeah, that works on Lose You to Love Me and Vulnerable, but it makes pure braggadociousness like Ring feel really out of place, especially when surrounded by redundant label leftovers like Let Me Get Me, Crowded Room, Kinda Crazy, and especially the ugly fusion of medical metaphors grafted onto fun. Some of these songs, they were leaked for other artists, and yet they wound up with Selena Gomez. That doesn't really help her establish a unique identity as a songwriter on her own here. That's what I'm saying. And you know what? Well, it feels like her most focused album to date. It's still kind of flailing for an identity in this sound and the writing to really fill it in. And yet, in the music industry, that's not all that rare at all. What's rare is that it's successful. But yeah, if you're curious for this, I guess fans only, 5 out of 10. Guess check it out if you want to. But beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If you've got any comments on what I've covered here, down there below, I'd be happy to hear all your opinions. And hey, if you want to get involved with putting albums on my schedule, the link to my Patreon is right over there, where I've got plenty of rules surrounding how the process works, and I'd be happy to invite some of you guys on board. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching On the Pulse by Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.